destruction by pulling out of Kuwait. The ambassador said it is not the U.S. Installation to occupy or dismember Iraq, but to liberate Kuwait. Again, back to an emergency session of NATO. But the military offensive overnight has been described as possibly the greatest air attack in history, the largest, the strongest air attack in history. CNN's journalist in Baghdad wrote out that attack. CNN's John Holloman joins us now live from Baghdad, where it is just after 8 o'clock in the morning there. John.
Susan, good morning. An interesting development here. At a location, I guess, less than a quarter of a mile from our CNN Baghdad bureau, there is a huge cloud of white smoke that is pouring out of the side of a building. We don't know whether it is being manufactured intentionally or whether there's something on fire in this building, but the smoke is coming out in such volume that it has totally obscured our view of the outside world in a very short period of time. It would lead one to believe that perhaps the Iraqis have manufactured this smoke. We don't know anything else about it except that we see the source that it's coming from, and that it's made it very, very difficult to see even out our windows here at the hotel. It's thicker than the thickest fog we have seen in the early morning hours in Baghdad. A couple of other notes for you. The Pentagon says the Iraqi Air Force has been decimated. The elite Republican Guards, the best Iraqi soldiers, the ones sent to defend Kuwait, have been destroyed. The Iraqis have a different view of that situation. Baghdad Radio quotes Iraqi officials as saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, in an address to the Iraqi people and the Arab nations, says, the mother of all wars has started, and the victory is very near. Iraqi television in the recent past has invited CNN to transmit all the pictures of the attack we made last night to you. We will begin doing that within a matter of minutes if we can work out the technical details and if Iraqi television is able to operate and has electricity and all the facilities that they normally have when we send pictures to you. And you'll remember if you were watching our broadcast earlier in the evening in the United States, or 3 or 4 hours ago, wherever you were, the descriptions that we offered you over the telephone line here about how remarkable it was. We have a guest who was here during the bombing of Baghdad last night, who was also in Tripoli, Libya, in the Libyan bombing in April 1986. She's Marie Colvin, the Middle East correspondent for the Sunday Times. Marie, first of all, now tell me what happened to you last night.
Listen, the factor. You had it look like some massive battle out there last night, going, rowing, and starting all over again over a period of about 2 or 3 hours. But we could see out of our windows was massive bombing off in the distance, and not that far, maybe 5 miles along what looks to be the Baghdad airport, probably some other targets, and they don't seem to have actually hit in the city. Whereas in Libya, they did hit targets in the city, Gaddafi's barracks, where he was living at the time, for example.
Yeah, all right, Marie. Anything else you want to tell us? How are you feeling in the aftermath of all this?
Very tired.
All right, well, I think there'll come a time when we'll all be able to get to sleep here. I don't know if it'll be now, but there's this acrid smoke that we told you about a few minutes ago at the beginning of our report is beginning to filter into the hotel. Mark Biello, this doesn't smell poisonous to you, does it? No, it smells just like some very thick smoke that's here. We'll continue our reports, Susan, and we'll keep you posted as best we can as the day continues. And we hope to be able to see those pictures we took last night as soon as we can get the TV station to send them to you.
Absolutely. And John, when we are able to get that video in, we will be rejoining you and your colleagues in Baghdad, and you can give us further details from your end. CNN's Richard Roth is standing by in Tel Aviv, one of the danger points. Of course, Iraq's Saddam Hussein has threatened to attack Israel. Tel Aviv was in distance of a possible Scud missile attack. You must be very relieved there, Richard.
Well, the sun is up here in Tel Aviv, and yes, the city is still standing, though the streets are very empty. The people of Israel have been urged by the government to stay at home. They've been ordered to open their gas masks to keep them ready, but to stay at home and listen to the radio, and millions of them are doing it. There were some nervous moments during the early hours here of the morning after word of the attack on Baghdad came. You'd hear a car backfire and perhaps a military plane overhead, but nothing much came of it, and this city is probably breathing a large sigh of relief right now. Here are some of the morning headlines of the papers that are just coming out. This is Israel's largest daily, saying U.S. planes attack Iraqi missiles. And then the second largest paper in Israel, Ma'ariv, saying war. And those papers are coming out on the streets right now, and those people who would like to leave their homes are probably going to snatch them up pretty quickly. Now, Israel ordered all of the people to stay at home, declaring a civil defense emergency. As part of that emergency, the citizens were told to open their gas mask kits. Millions have been distributed to the people over the last few weeks. And just yesterday, the army started handing them out to Palestinians in the West Bank. That after an order by the Supreme Court, which called the government's policy scandalous not to give them out to the Palestinians. The army was worried about trouble in the occupied territories by supporters of Saddam Hussein, and that people would be able to use the gas mask to ward off tear gas from the army. And in fact, the army has clamped down in these territories. Perhaps just in case, they have placed a curfew in the occupied territories and in communities in East Jerusalem. And Israeli radio is reporting this morning that 3 shots were fired at the U.S. consulate in East Jerusalem from a passing car. We don't have any other details at this moment. Now, an Israeli defense official says that Israel is not involved in any way in this conflict. An army official said the chances of a missile attack from Iraq are getting smaller and smaller as time passes. Right now, it's, quote, small and near zero. Of course, Tel Aviv, as you mentioned, is the city that was threatened by Saddam Hussein. In an interview with Mexican television, he said this would be the city where he would strike first should he be attacked by the multinational force. So far, all is quiet. Israel has ordered all workers in key industries to report to work today. Employees in the power, gasoline, and fire areas, and also the telephone company. There has been no significant call-up of reservists so far. Everyone is listening to the radio for the latest. Israel has always been confident that the U.S. forces would be able to do heavy damage to Saddam Hussein and his missile batteries. Just yesterday, a brigadier general of the Israeli Defense Force said, we are absolutely confident in the capabilities of the American forces. And he said that Israel was sure they would do the job. Now, also, what's taking place in Tel Aviv, the chief of staff of the Israeli military has called his general staff in, and we've seen soldiers in the streets carrying their brown gas mask boxes, and they've been reporting to their posts. We talked to people at various bars and all-night kiosks that have been open in Tel Aviv. General reaction has been certainly very favorable to what's happened. One woman said she was worried. 2 other men said that they were glad that it appears that it might be a short war. They were basing that on radio reports of the heavy damage inflicted by U.S. aircraft. An Israeli security official said that missiles pointed at Israel, some of them have been destroyed in the raid. That according to Israeli television. And the assistant to the military chief of operations says we know of some hits on missile batteries in the western parts of Iraq. Despite the calm here so far, though, Israel says it is still ready for anything. Richard Roth, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
And as Richard reported, Israeli officials are now saying that the chance of a missile strike is getting smaller and smaller. This is CNN's Wolf Blitzer is reporting from Pentagon officials that the U.S.-led forces have virtually decimated the Iraqi missile capability. Patrick?
And joining us now to add his expertise to the military attack against Iraq is Major General Perry Smith. General Smith is a retired 2-star Air Force general who commanded an F-15 wing in Europe. He's also the author of 2 books, Assignment Pentagon and Taking Charge. Welcome, General Smith, to you. Just heard that report from Susan and Wolf Blitzer at the Pentagon. By all accounts, at least from the Pentagon, this airstrike was massive. It was very, very effective. Wiped out, some reports are saying, the Iraqi Air Force, also the Republican Guard. We just heard the missile installations. Do you think that the strength of the Iraqi air defenses was overestimated, or was the Allied forces' capability of doing this kind of massive damage sort of underestimated?
I think probably a combination of both. Our capability was very, very good, and of course we came in low. We had a lot of electronic warfare to jam their radars. We used a lot of good new tactics and techniques. Our training was very good, and we kind of overwhelmed the system. And then as more and more waves came through, it was easier and easier for them to come in. So the raid was quite successful, well planned, and well executed. I think it's a little premature to say that the Iraqi Air Force is completely wiped out yet. They may well be in their shelters, and we may see them sometime in the next day or 2.
Are you surprised, though, by the kind of reports that we're having decimated in this massive attack? I mean,
I'm not really surprised because we had so much time to practice. We have such good systems, and we have such a massive amount of air. I guess if there is a surprise, that the fact that we apparently have not lost any aircraft, I would think that operational losses, some kind of losses would be expected. And so as we look forward to the next few days, we shouldn't get too optimistic, because we will probably lose some airplanes, because warfare is very hazardous, and the adrenaline is pumping pretty heavily in those cockpits right now.
Give us some idea, if you would. I mean, we've heard these incredible reports from our 3 reporters in Baghdad who were sitting in the hotel watching these incredible airstrikes all around Baghdad and surrounding areas. Give us some idea strategically what happened. Did the stealth bombers go in? I mean, what actually do you think was used, and how was it used?
I'm going to have to guess in this because I don't have any detailed information, but my guess would be we used the stealth aircraft initially to go in after the radars, to knock out the radars, and then followed in with F-15Es, which are the air-to-ground Es, air-to-ground F-15s. They come in very low. They come in with very sophisticated radar, very precise weapons, and they hit the military targets. And then wave after wave of F-15Es and perhaps some other low-level attack aircraft throughout the night.
Now, did they come off of just ground bases, or were they coming off of carriers? I mean, we do know there's some reports that they apparently left from Saudi Arabia.
It appears that the great majority of the missions were coming out of Saudi Arabia. There may have been some out of carriers, but probably not. I would guess that most of these came out of Saudi Arabia. The F-15s would fly off the ground. The F-117 stealth fighters would have come off the ground. The F-111s off the ground. So I would think it was largely a Air Force operation at least against Baghdad.
Well, we're in, as we hear from Wolf Blitzer also at the Pentagon, we're in sort of a damage assessment at this point and some sort of a pause mode. If another bombing attack were ordered by the Pentagon or requested by the Pentagon, what would they do next?
Well, again, they would look and see what they did and what they didn't do. They go after targets that they had hoped to hit well and didn't hit so well. They would probably begin to shift toward Kuwait and think in terms of isolating the Iraqi forces inside Kuwait from resupply from Iraq. But it would be an evolving kind of campaign, a little hard to predict at this moment.
But how important would the air power be in terms of, if, let's say, in the worst-case scenario, the ground forces were needed? Obviously, a lot of people in the Pentagon are thinking if that is needed, they would like it only to be a mopping-up kind of operation as opposed to a real offensive push into Kuwait.
This is a very important point. We see a major doctrinal shift here, and that is, in all times in history, when we had massed armies facing each other with air power was always in support of the massed army. Now we have the air forces in the lead, perhaps even decisively in the lead, with the army and ground forces more in a supporting role. The situation is ideal. You've got a desert situation. You've got plenty of time for training. You've got a very massive amount of air power. But it may be a unique time in history where, in a tactical situation, air power would be the decisive element.
Well, as you well know, General, during Vietnam, the bombing of Hanoi, I guess in 1972, was at the end of the war, and our colleague Peter Arnett was mentioning this earlier tonight as he was describing the bombing around Baghdad. But that happened at the end of the war. At the beginning of the war, we had these massive airstrikes, so as you say, historically, it could turn out to be that this was a really sort of almost a preemptive bombing to stop the war immediately.
Well, we came out of Vietnam with a lot of lessons, and we realized we needed better training, we needed better technology, we needed better systems, we needed more accuracy, we needed better cooperation among the services, and all that has taken gradually hold. And I think the result is that the United States military today is pretty darn effective, and what we see in at least this first night of combat, a really impressive operation.
So really the targets were sort of, the maps were sort of computerized into the cockpit of the...
Yeah, if you get inside the F-15E, you see a very computerized cockpit. 2 people, one in the back who does the controlling of all the radars, and the front seater who takes care of the flying the airplane. And they have a map in front of them, which is highlights the route in and also the specific target they're going after. And as a result, you get accuracies down to less than a foot in many cases. And they come in low, they're using jamming and so forth, so it's very hard to hit them as they go through.
Well, let me just ask you, as we're talking about, sort of a first time in history that we've gone in with the Air Force first. Let's assume that Saddam Hussein did want to surrender or capitulate at this point, how would he do that in an air war, so to speak? I mean, rather than ground forces just saying we surrender.
Well, I think a couple of ways. I think he'd first make contact with us, and I think the second thing was he'd start withdrawal of his troops from Kuwait to show that he's really sincere about some kind of a move out. So he'd have to not only make a statement, but he'd have to make some movements out of Kuwait.
Major General Perry Smith, thank you very much for your expertise and your appraisal. Certainly we don't know until we see all the video and the damage assessment is in, but thank you very much. Susan?
And we hope to get the first sights of war in the Gulf from the Pentagon rule in any time now. CNN's Jennifer Michael recaps some of the sounds as Baghdad came under Allied fire.
The sounds of war. The direct communication line from Baghdad picks up some of the blasts from the U.S.-led attack on Iraq, as Operation Desert Shield became Operation Desert Storm. From his vantage point at the El Rashid Hotel, CNN's Bernard Shaw described the first frightening moments of the air assault.
Just one comment. Clearly, I've never been there, but it feels like we're in the center of hell.
Privately, Pentagon sources described the initial airstrike on Iraq and occupied Kuwait as a blowout.
The airstrike was massive, was devastating, and indeed those reports appear to be very, very impressive as far as the United States is concerned. Iraq's air bases, and there are probably about 100 Iraqi air bases. Almost all of them appear to have been destroyed, according to Pentagon officials, who tell CNN that those air bases were pinpointed by the F-15s, the F-16s, A-6 carrier-based aircraft that came into Saudi Arabia, landed at forward bases, and then took off and returned to those bases in Saudi Arabia. The Iraqi Air Force, except for a few notable exceptions, didn't even come up to challenge the invading U.S. fighters. It was an extremely impressive U.S. airstrike.
Publicly, the top Pentagon officials were more cautious in reporting on the success of the attack, conducted by hundreds of U.S., British, Saudi, and Kuwaiti aircraft.
Well, there has been no air resistance.
Casualties so far.
We will, at the appropriate time, be releasing information on casualties. We're not prepared to release any specifics now. I will simply say that the preliminary reports we have received in terms of the success of the operation, and that includes the possibility of casualties, have been very, very encouraging.
Strategic Iraqi sites were the targets of this first assault on Saddam Hussein's military machine. In his formal announcement of war, President Bush described the reasons for the assault, its goals, and its targets.
Now, the 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal.
Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed Saddam Hussein has not made good on his threat to lash back at Israel.
We have made the preparations for our population. We've asked them to take certain precautions, asked the people to stay in their homes for the moment. So we have not relaxed our state of alert, but we follow things, as I said, very closely and wish the American and other forces full success.
Senior White House officials said the air attacks now underway will continue virtually nonstop. One U.S. official tells CNN massive bombings could continue from 7 to 10 days. Jennifer Michael, CNN, reporting.
Once again, we're going to go back to Baghdad Live, where John Holloman and his two other colleagues, Peter Arnett and Bernard Shaw, have been for the last 10 hours or 12 hours as this thing has been going on. And let's check in with John right now for the very latest. John?
Pastor, good morning to you. I trust it's morning where you are. I think it is. Here in Baghdad, it's about 8:30 in the morning right now, and there are buses and people going back and forth to work in taxi cabs on the streets. Out my window, I can see that there's still the early morning Baghdad fog. I'm going to open the window and look out and maybe let you listen to what I can hear damage from the terrific, devastating attack which occurred just a few hours ago. As I look around, I see people are going about their business now on the streets. I don't see anybody walking the streets, and there may be some concern in the minds of some people that it's still not safe. After that attack overnight in the hours of darkness, there might be some people still concerned that the attack could be continued in the daylight. There's a low cloud cover over the city, broken in some places, and there's some birds flying up in the vicinity of the sun, which is over in the east. I can see flags waving on the Iraqi National Parade ground. That's what it looks like. I'll tell you what we're hearing from official sources here. From the Iraqi media, from Baghdad radio, Iraqi officials are saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, in an address to the Iraqi people and the Arab nation, says the mother of all wars has started. The victory is very near. And as we told you a few minutes ago, Patrick, we've gotten permission from Iraqi television to send you some pictures, but it appears from what we can tell, Iraqi television has no ability to transmit pictures right now. We're attempting to work with them to get those pictures to you as soon as we can, and we'll let you know when we know more about the timetable for releasing them. At any rate, here in Baghdad, things at our hotel are coming back to normal. We're attempting to...
John, excuse me just for a second, if I can. John, just a sec. We're looking at some pool video. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but we are looking at some pool video that was apparently shot before the attacks earlier yesterday. This is pool video of an Air Force base in Saudi Arabia, apparently seeing some of the planes being ready for the attack.
As the president ordered the attack on Baghdad, some of the Pentagon planners and the military analysts said that a sweep mission into Iraq or Kuwait would probably be led by an F-15 squadron.
Message from President Saddam Hussein at 8:30. It will be visible in Jordan. And we need a translator.
I'm sorry, John. We were stepping all over each other. What did you say? Repeat that.
I'm sorry, Susan. I was giving our whole network, as well as our viewers, a message that the Iraqi television authorities have just told CNN they will be transmitting a message from President Saddam Hussein in just a couple of minutes. I believe 8:30 is just a couple of minutes from now. So we don't know whether they'll have the facility to do that. We hope they will, and we just wanted to alert those of the technical people along the CNN network line who have to do things for us to present those pictures to you, that we'll need a translator to translate the president's words into English. And we'll need some technical work done so that we'll be able to see and hear President Saddam Hussein, but it might be coming up pretty soon.
All right. Thank you, John. We will, of course, endeavor to get that to you live, translated as quickly as possible, of course. The F-15 squadrons are supposed to be a very important part of the U.S.-led effort in an attack on Iraq or Kuwait. For example, 4 F-15s would dart ahead of a bomb-laden attack plane trying to perhaps open a furrow in the sky by shooting any Iraqi resistance. Again, there apparently was little or no Iraqi resistance. Patrick?
Again, that was pool video. We are awaiting our video from Baghdad. We're from John Holliman. John Sweeney is in Riyadh. He's live right now with the very latest from there. John, I'm not sure if you can see this pool video, but we see a pilot and an Air Force jet obviously shot prior to the attacks into Kuwait and into Iraq.
Indeed, that's what you're seeing, the very first pictures of these are F-15 Strike Eagle aircraft, the United States best fighter. It can be heavily armed, and indeed these planes were here from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, originally in North Carolina. They took off at around 12:45 a.m. Saudi time. That's about 17 hours after the UN deadline. And this is the first wave of aircraft being prepared for takeoff. These particular Strike Eagle planes carry a 2-man crew, pilots and a navigator and a bomber who flies in the rear. The ground crews loaded many of the planes with a dozen half-ton cluster bombs and 4 air-to-air heat-seeking missiles. The F-15 Strike Eagle is the newest version of the F-15, equipped with infrared night vision system. And obviously, as they led the attack, they were quite successful with that night vision. They encountered, as we now know, very little Iraqi air resistance over Kuwait and Iraq. They were perhaps even more successful than anyone thought. And they indeed, as we have heard, apparently decimated the Iraqi Air Force. As we've heard from the Pentagon of Wolf Blitzer, 100 Air Force bases apparently destroyed. Many of those, however, were attacked by carrier-based aircraft, as we understand. The F-14 Tomcat is a very similar plane to this F-15 that we're looking at here, being prepared by the ground crews in the largest air base in Saudi Arabia, which we're still not allowed to identify. It seems to be remarkably calm as these people are preparing for what is one of the most momentous occasions, really, in U.S. military history. Perhaps that's a tribute to the professionalism of the crews involved and the fact that they've been training here for the past 5 months. I would say that this is probably the best trained military contingent that the United States has ever sent into war, because they've been here so long practicing on site. Again, this is the United States' most lethal air weapon, the F-15 Strike Eagle, being prepared for takeoff. Again, these planes originally came from Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina.
Again, we have been listening to CNN's John Sweeney, who is reporting for us from Saudi Arabia. We are looking at Pentagon pool video of F-15 Eagles as they are about to be deployed from Saudi Arabia. John, once the F-15s were aloft, how long would it take them to get from Saudi Arabia to Baghdad?
I couldn't give you the exact time, but these planes, it wouldn't take very long. I'm sorry I can't give you a more specific answer, but it wouldn't take very long. We've been watching these planes for several months over here, and they have a booster thruster in the back, and many of the pilots were telling us some months ago, before the war started, that they enjoyed flying in Saudi Arabia, especially because this booster that they use utilizes an awful lot of fuel, and in the United States they weren't always allowed to use that, but here they had the great access to fuel, so these pilots who love to fly anyway would usually hit this booster thruster. I hope I'm describing it correctly, and we'd see this long tail of flames shooting out of these planes, and all of a sudden it would shoot into the sky as faster than you could imagine.
John, I'm sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
John, where the Saudi Arabia also has the same aircraft, did they fly out of this, we're looking at full video as we continue to look at this, where did the Saudis fly out of? Do you know if they were involved in this particular video we're seeing here?
Yeah, the Saudis fly out of the same air base, and during their practice training missions, frequently they would fly together, as they did indeed on the real thing.
John, thank you very much. John Sweeney reporting to us from Saudi Arabia as we continue to look at unedited Pentagon pool video of the F-15 Eagles being prepared for battle in Saudi Arabia. One of the people that rode out the attack of Baghdad is CNN's John Holloman. He rejoins us now. Well, it is apparently not Pentagon pool video. It is U.S. news media pool video. John Holloman is rejoining us now from Baghdad. John.
Hi again, Susan. It's kind of a confusing situation now, I'm sure, as the Pentagon and perhaps even the Iraqis will let us all send our pictures in to CNN, and our viewers will just get a crosses the lines. At least that's what we hope and trust. Iraqi television has just told us they will attempt to feed the world and CNN a message from President Saddam Hussein in the next few minutes. So far, we are told that there are two ways to get pictures and sounds out of Iraq to the rest of the world. The normal ways to do it are a path that goes over land and a path that goes through a satellite. And the people at the receiving end of both of those paths say they're not receiving anything from Iraq right now. We hope that problem will be solved soon and that we'll be able to see those pictures of the message from President Saddam Hussein, plus CNN's video, which we shot during the attack. We're told that the head of Iraqi television will have to look at our pictures before we're allowed to send them out to you and the rest of the world. We don't know how long that process will take because we do have several different sets of pictures to show you. But at any rate, we hope that'll be coming up pretty soon as technical problems in Iraqi TV can be solved. One more thing. We had been told, we had expected before what happened last night happened, that Iraqi television would be a target of the coalition forces. It turned out it was not. There's no damage to the TV station, according to CNN's Chris Christmanich, who was just there. They don't have telephone service, nor does anyone in Baghdad, as far as we know. And there's still no electricity available anywhere else in the city, but Iraqi television has generators, so they are up and running. That's the latest and the newest information I have. Susan?
All right. Thank you, CNN's John Holloman, keeping us up to date from Baghdad. Patrick?
Right now we're going to go to CNN's Mitch Leopard, who's standing by in London, and there people are anticipating the address by the new British Prime Minister. Mitch, what's the latest?
Well, Patrick, it was just before midnight London time when Operation Desert Storm began. The Ministry of Defense here did confirm that British forces were involved in the initial attacks. Britain has 35,000 troops in the Gulf, as well as 60 aircraft in the Naval Armada. It is the second largest military force behind the United States. Despite the late hour at Trafalgar Square in London, late shift workers were converging to take the all-night buses home, and there was much reaction.
I think that war was inevitable, but I'm really sad that it started. Now that it has, I just hope it's over as quickly as possible and as few lives are lost as possible.
I'm sure I'm not majorly shocked. I just worry for the people out there, especially all, so I've got several mates on aircraft carrier. Guy I know, really close friend, my parents on an aircraft carrier. And seriously worrying for them.
The fact that Britain is playing such an important part in the war poses great problems for us, people who live in London, after the war is finished, because I think this city will become a target of terrorism for years to come.
Not far away in Whitehall, government offices had extra security. There you find offices for the Ministry of Defense, Foreign Office, offices where all coordination for emergency medical services for injured troops take place, and of course, number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's residence. John Major spoke with President Bush before the attack, and just after, protesters in front of Downing Street were against American and British forces in the Gulf.
This is the seat of the Tory government. This is where the people who made the decision to massacre innocent Iraqis are actually to be found, and therefore this is where we find our enemy, and we'll come and demonstrate against them.
As has often been the case, CNN's worldwide reach showed President Bush addressing Americans. Only this time, his audience included night owls at an all-night coffee shop in London's West End. It is now 5:42 in the morning London time. Prime Minister Major will have comments for the United Kingdom and the news media in about 2 hours. He is expected to outline Britain's strategic involvement in Operation Desert Storm. You want me to Leopard, CNN reporting live in London.
Mitch, we are going to hear from the Prime Minister here in the next hour or so, as you just said. What else can we expect to hear from other European community members, and particularly France, that obviously has gone along with what did happen in the last 12 hours? Or what can we expect to hear from other members?
Well, the Prime Minister, we expect to hear what we've heard all along, that they take a view about this engagement that is very similar to the United States. Of course, as we've already heard, the envoys of the 16 NATO nations have been meeting an emergency session in Brussels since the outbreak of the war, and also later this afternoon in about 12 hours, the Foreign ministers of the 12 European countries will be meeting in emergency session, ironically, in Paris. So we may find out a little bit more about what the French think.
So the reaction from the piece that we just saw that you did there, Mitch, the reaction in Britain, how would you say they're reacting to, the people generally are reacting to what has gone on in the last 12 hours?
Well, it is quite mixed, as we expected. We toured around town and got quite a few young people who do work late-night shifts. We found people going home from evening plays in downtown London's West End. And we have been getting some, even though it was late and many people were already in bed. They will soon find out, probably in the next hour or two. But we have some political reaction. Chancellor Cole
Mitch Leopard, we have some more full tape here. Mitch Leopard, excuse me for interrupting. But again, we have some U.S. pool. This is shot by the media. This is pool video that was shot presumably in Saudi Arabia. This can't obviously tell what kind of an attack plane bomber that was, but we'll bring in Wolf Blitzer, who's at the Pentagon right now, has been throughout the evening and the early morning. Wolf Blitzer, can you fill us in on what we're seeing here?
This looks like some of the first U.S. fighter aircraft returning to the U.S. air bases in Saudi Arabia. Looks like an F-15 that obviously returned at night. Clearly, the U.S. Air Force and the Navy wanted to undertake all of these airstrikes at night. We're told that F-117A stealth fighters, the radar-evading fighters, were very much involved in knocking out some of the major Iraqi strategic sites, the chemical weapons facilities, the Scud ballistic bases. We're told that most of the Iraqi Air Force, all of the major air bases appear to have been destroyed. Pentagon officials are obviously very pleased by the work by these fighter aircraft. Here is an F-15 returning to an air base in Saudi Arabia. Technically, these are Saudi air bases. This was a joint operation between the United States, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Great Britain, the four countries that participated in so far what is still an air war. Here are some of the ground crew awaiting the return of the first U.S. fighter aircraft sent into Iraq and occupied Kuwait to go after several of the most important Iraqi strategic targets. Clearly, these guys are pleased. Even as we speak right now, the Pentagon has received no indication that any of the hundreds of U.S. and Allied fighter aircraft involved in the strike, that any of them were damaged or destroyed. We're told, at least as of now, these are initial reports, that they appear to have returned safely to their bases in Saudi Arabia. Here are some more planes returning from the first wave of U.S. airstrikes in Saudi Arabia. Still dark in Saudi Arabia. This is the first videotape that the Pentagon pool has released to the American news media. Clearly there is a great sense of relief, at least based on these initial reports. And we're going to get more information, of course, during the daylight hours as the intelligence and satellite reconnaissance photography goes over and assesses all of the damage from these massive bombing runs. Here comes another U.S. fighter aircraft returning to a base in Saudi Arabia from its mission in Iraq. Seems to be taking, is it landing? That seems to be taking off and going. This videotape obviously was taken earlier this evening as the United States undertook this massive operation, codenamed Desert Storm. Interestingly enough, Storm probably came from Storm in Norman. General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander of Operation Desert Shield. Here's looks like a ground crew person, but we can't hear exactly what he's saying. This is Wolf Blitzer reporting live from the Pentagon. Now back to you, Patrick, in Atlanta.
Again, what we're watching here is U.S. pool tape, and there is an interview, as you can see, but the audio, we don't have any control over that. That has been fed in. We do not hear what exactly he was saying, but again, that was U.S. pool video, presumably of the fighters returning from their mission into Iraq and into Kuwait. Susan?
Again, we also need to point out that we expect to hear an address from Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television. We don't know when this will be, but CNN's crews in Baghdad have been told to expect an address from Saddam Hussein to the Iraqi people on television, quote, momentarily. Now, we should point out that we don't know when that address was taped. We will, of course, attempt to bring it to you live or as soon as possible. We also plan to broadcast our own video shot by CNN crews that weathered the artillery, the storm, last night in Baghdad. We will bring that to you live, unedited, as soon as it is fed into CNN's headquarters here in Atlanta. Meantime, in the United States, members of Congress were quick to react to the beginning of war against Iraq. Most expressed hope that the conflict ends quickly with a minimum number of casualties. Some lawmakers also praised what they consider the apparent U.S. upper hand in the assault.
The difference between it was another gentleman, the difference between the UN and allied forces and the Iraqi is that the field commanders have appropriate ability to give appropriate orders in our particular procedures, and the Iraqis take their order from a single point, and they apparently blew out the command and control centers at each location. That, I would think, is what must have occurred, because they did not seem to respond, at least the Iraqi air arm did not seem to respond, which I would think would possibly mean that many of them were taken out on the ground.
Even if the Air Forces don't do it entirely themselves, they may do 90% of it or 80% of it, in which case then the ground force operation would be fairly simple. But I would be very surprised. I'm still skeptical. I mean, put me down as skeptical. I think that you're going to need a ground attack, that this thing is going to be weeks, not days, that we're still going to need, we're going to have some casualties here. In other words, don't let this optimism here, don't let it carry you away.
One California congressman was outraged by the war effort, but most were supportive. By the end of the week, Congress is expected to have a resolution supporting the president's action.
Cuban President Fidel Castro says the attack on Iraq could have been avoided. Mr. Castro was giving a news conference when he found out that the multinational force had attacked Iraq. He says, quote, it's an unnecessary war. Anything can happen there, even an ecological catastrophe. Castro says the U.S., quote, was bent on war when a peaceful solution could have been found, unquote.
My feelings are that of shock and horror that is felt by all, and which the entire world must be feeling. Feelings of a great sorrow, a great awareness of what war is and can mean, the loss of human life, and the great material destruction. I think also of the terrible consequences that he will have on the world economy, especially for the countries of the third world, and of the potential dangers that exist within that war that should never have been unleashed, and which, as I said before, was unnecessary for obtaining the objectives that they wanted in the UN.
And the Cuban leader went on to say that he has a feeling of pain, a very deep bitterness. He says the mentality of the Arab countries was... This, again, is U.S. pool tape. As you can see, people preparing, servicemen preparing with their chemical weapons, their gas masks, in preparation. There were a number of warnings in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere throughout the Middle East of concern of an impending, perhaps retaliatory attack by Scud missiles from Iraq. But again, those have not been confirmed. Apparently, the Scud missiles did not leave Iraq and hit anywhere else. But as you can see, U.S. service personnel getting ready for a possible chemical attack. This was taken earlier. Again, this is U.S. pool video. Obviously, after the massive airstrikes, things have calmed down significantly, and we would presume that people are not in this mode where they would be wearing their chemical weapons apparatus. This was shot prior to the airstrikes into Iraq and Kuwait by the four nations involved, including the United States, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Great Britain. personnel equipping themselves with anti-chemical weapons gear, as you can see, including gas masks. This was shot earlier by the U.S. pool, a video that we had just received here at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
American-led forces, of course, were very concerned about the possibility that Iraq would use chemical weapons. One commander saying that he was forced to assume that Iraq would attack American troops with a range of biological and chemical weapons which can be deadly. They are not necessarily deadly. During the 8-year Iran-Iraq war, Saddam Hussein reportedly used chemical weapons during that war. Among the casualties, only about 10% were estimated to be from chemical weapons. But of course, the United States has established that Iraq has manufactured and used chemical weapons both during the Iran-Iraq war and also against Iraq's own Kurdish population.
Wolf Blitzer is joining us once again live at the Pentagon. Wolf, as you can see, this latest U.S. pool video, you want to fill us in on what we're seeing?
Well, I got a small monitor here, Patrick, but it looks like obviously a military vehicle at an air base someplace in Saudi Arabia. And according to the Pentagon ground rules, we're not allowed to say where these air bases are located for security reasons. Here comes some of the additional ground equipment. Looks like obviously a very huge air base.
Well, let me just have you reiterate something you did a little while ago. I think it's very important that we are in a lull in terms of the bombing for damage assessment by the Pentagon, that this by no means means that there will not be any additional bombing or that the war is over or anything like that. As you said, I think we need to clarify that for our viewers.
That's absolutely correct, Patrick. The war is by no means over. What is over is the initial U.S. airstrike. We're told now that the U.S. Air Force and the Navy fighters have paused. They want to reassess exactly what has happened, take a look at all of the Iraqi damage, send the satellites over, send some other high-flying U.S. reconnaissance planes over. Now that it appears that the U.S. air power owns the skies, and as I'm saying, this appears to be the case, because only a handful of Iraqi planes even took off to challenge some of these invading U.S. aircraft. The U.S. will have a relatively easy opportunity now to assess the entire damage that was inflicted by this initial U.S. airstrike. But we are told that the airstrikes have stopped for the time being. The crews have returned. We have no reports yet, and I want to stress yet, we have no reports yet of any U.S. casualties or any of the U.S. planes that may have been lost or are missing so far. That seems to be pretty much okay as far as the Pentagon is concerned. Here come some more military vehicles over at this air base in Saudi Arabia, awaiting the return of some of the U.S. fighters that went in this pinpoint airstrike. And Pete Williams, the Pentagon spokesman, a little while ago, stopped by and told some of the journalists who are still at the Pentagon, and there are plenty of journalists here, obviously, that the U.S. has no evidence that the Iraqis managed to launch any of their Scud ballistic missiles, their ground-to-ground ballistic missiles. Some were supposedly armed with chemical warheads, but the U.S. cannot confirm that any of the Iraqi missiles were launched. The initial targets U.S. officials had always felt would be the U.S. air bases, the oil facilities in eastern Saudi Arabia, as well as Israel. We're told that the major Iraqi Scud ballistic missile sites, and there goes our feed from Saudi Arabia, we're told that the major Iraqi ballistic missile sites in the western part of Iraq, what the U.S. intelligence community has dubbed as H2 and H3, those were among the initial U.S. targets. They were destroyed, and U.S. officials tell CNN that the immediate threat to Israel clearly has been eased. Patrick?
Wolf, in terms of the reassessment and damage assessment, how long do you anticipate that would take? And if there were more bombing ordered by the Pentagon, when do you think that would take place? Would they wait again until nighttime, or would there be bombing? It's 9 o'clock in the morning, Baghdad time right now. Would there be additional bombing in daylight hours, perhaps even today?
I think that it's fair to say that this pause, Pentagon officials tell CNN that this pause has a dual purpose. to actually assess the military situation, to see exactly what the damage is as far as the Iraqis are concerned, and potentially what the U.S. and allied forces, any damage that they may have sustained. But there's also, I'm told, a political message. There's a desire to see if Saddam Hussein, after this initial setback, clearly there has been a military setback to the Iraqi leadership, if after this initial setback, Saddam Hussein is prepared to announce that Iraq will withdraw its hundreds of thousands of troops from Kuwait. I am told that if the Iraqi leader, even at this late moment, were to make that kind of announcement, were to come forward and say, okay, that's it, the Iraqi forces are leaving Kuwait, the government of exile of Kuwait can be restored, the U.S. would presumably, and this is a strong word, presumably, not go back to those airstrikes. Largely, the U.S. believes that the major targets in Iraq have now been destroyed. That Iraq's chemical weapons potential, nuclear weapons potential, ballistic missile potential, and a big chunk of the Iraqi Air Force, a large chunk of the Republican Guard have effectively been destroyed. So now the word is being awaited from Saddam Hussein in Baghdad or wherever he happens to be right now.
Okay, once again, Wolf Blitzer, thank you very much for reporting live from the Pentagon. Of course, he will keep us updated with the very latest developments from there. Susan?
We also should point out that we are seeing this video as you are seeing this video. We are not able to edit it. We are bringing it to you as soon as it is fed in because we feel it's important that you see it immediately. On the domestic and on the political and the diplomatic front in Belgium, NATO ministers are meeting in an emergency session to address the air attack on Iraq. And meantime, members of the UN Security Council are meeting. They were summoned to UN headquarters for urgent consultations. CNN's Jeannie Most is standing by live at the United Nations. Jeannie, what's the latest there?
The latest is that the meeting of the UN Security Council has just broken up. The members are filing out and leaving. The U.S. ambassador apparently briefed the 15 members of the council. He did not give them a detailed description of what the United States has done. He didn't say, well, we've struck here or we've struck there. Instead, he gave a kind of general three-page statement, a political sort of statement justifying what the United States has done, saying things like our goal is not the destruction or dismemberment of Iraq, it is the liberation of Kuwait. And there was one interesting line in it that he said, the U.S. ambassador said that Iraq can still avoid further destruction by unconditional, immediate, and complete withdrawal from Kuwait. So that is some of what the U.S. ambassador told the members of the UN Security Council tonight in a meeting that has just ended. The reaction here has been somewhat predictable. The Soviet Union, for instance, has been strongly supportive of the U.S. action. On the other hand, countries like Yemen and Cuba have been critical. Yemen and Cuba were the two countries that voted against the resolution authorizing the use of force. We've put together a couple of comments made by people here. First, the Cuban ambassador, then the Kuwaiti ambassador, and the U.S. ambassador.
Maybe when war goes on, people will realize that it's very, very easy to enter into a war. The difficult thing is to get out of it.
Surely we feel very sorry for the city to be bombed, but this has been befallen on us because of the Iraqi intransigence.
Is there going to be a message for Hussein? I think the message for Hussein was just delivered.
And as I mentioned before, the council has broken up now. The council's not expected to do anything, really. After all, it was the council that authorized this action. It was the council that authorized member states to use all necessary means if Iraq did not withdraw by the 15th. And it probably comes as no surprise, but there has been no sign of the Iraqi ambassador here at the United Nations. I'm Jeannie Most reporting live from the UN.
Jeannie Most?
Thank you, Jeannie. Wouldn't the U.S. Use its veto power as a member of the Security Council, even if the Security Council at this point tried to do anything on the diplomatic front? Couldn't the U.S. just go ahead and veto it?
That's exactly what would happen. U.S. officials have told CNN that if a country, for instance Cuba or Yemen, would try to introduce some sort of measure to limit the options of the United States, The U.S. official made it clear that the U.S. would simply veto that, and there's also Britain on the council with veto power and the Soviet Union, so it looks like the U.S. will have no problems in the Security Council for now.
Thank you, CNN. Judy Most reporting to you live from the United Nations as the UN Security Council meeting just broke up. Patrick.
And for the very latest developments from the White House, let's check in with CNN senior White House correspondent Charles Bierbauer. Charles?
Well, there really aren't any late developments here at the White House. You know, the focus of attention has certainly shifted away from here after the president's speech this evening, his explanation of just what it is he has set in motion. Indeed, the president left the Oval Office a little while after that 9 p.m. speech. He invited evangelist Billy Graham to spend the evening at the White House. Billy Graham has been a longtime friend of President Bush's, a sometimes spiritual counselor. One of the interesting things I was told today is that while the president was up at Camp David over the Christmas holidays, he had 12 days up there during which he really pondered and put himself at peace with the moral questions of going to war with Iraq. And that while the president had always been essentially comfortable with the use of force, this was a particularly important period of time for him. Officials say that throughout the president has been determined that whenever he did take action, he was going to make it emphatic. In his speech this evening, he accused Saddam Hussein of having stalled and finally having run out of time. This is how the president put it.
Saddam was warned over and over again to comply with the will of the United Nations, leave Kuwait or be driven out. Saddam has arrogantly rejected all warnings. Instead, he tried to make this a dispute between Iraq and the United States of America. Well, he failed. Tonight, 28 nations, countries from 5 continents, Europe and Asia, Africa and the Arab League, have forces in the Gulf area standing shoulder to shoulder against Saddam Hussein. These countries had hoped the use of force could be avoided. Regrettably, we now believe that only force will make him leave.
In those remarks in the Oval Office address, the president also had one message for the Iraqi people with whom he said he has no quarrel. He suggested that perhaps they could now convince, through some sort of popular voice, convince Saddam Hussein that he really ought to live. Patrick?
Charles, let me ask you a question that we were just talking with Wolf Blitzer about at the Pentagon in terms of perhaps being not a false sense of optimism, but certainly a sense of optimism that the first phase went very well. But the White House by no means says that the war is over, there will not be additional bombings, etc.
By no means. No one says that the war is over. President Bush, as he was in the Oval Office early this evening, in fact, right at 7 o'clock our time when the bombing was due to begin, he was watching television. He was watching the reports coming from Baghdad, remarked that things were moving right on schedule. But what we don't know is precisely how long this timetable is. The president has always said it would be swift and decisive, but we also heard Secretary Cheney say that this is really just the beginning, that this could take some time. It depends on if, for that matter, if Saddam Hussein has gotten the message and is prepared to change his approach to this. But every indication is that this could go on for days, and we have really only dealt with the air war at this point. We don't know whether there's going to be a ground war. That has not started. The president has committed heavy aerial assets, presumably in the hope that that might be enough. But you're absolutely right. No one is claiming victory. They're claiming satisfaction.
Okay, Charles Bierbauer, thank you very much for reporting live from the White House. Of course, he and his colleagues will keep us updated from there. Susan?
And CNN's colleagues in Jerusalem are standing by to keep us up to date from that angle. CNN's Linda Scherzer is here. Linda, what's the latest there?
Well, it's been a very good morning for Israel. Those were the words of Defense Minister Moshe Aaron, who appeared on Israeli television just about 40 minutes ago. It's now a little after 8 o'clock in Israel. The Israelis are waking up. They are now glued to their TV sets and radios and learning about an operation with a great sense of relief, an operation that happened while most people were fast asleep. The streets were virtually empty in the early hours of the morning. morning in Israel as Operation Desert Storm got underway. Shortly after the news was reported here, the Army ordered all Israelis to stay inside their homes, to open up their boxes containing their gas masks, and to be prepared to use them. Sometime after the air attack started, a senior Army officer reported that some of the bases and missile launch sites that posed the greatest threat to Israel had been dealt a serious blow by Allied bombers. The news brought a great sense of relief to the Israelis who'd been preparing for the possibility of a chemical attack to follow the breakout of war. But defense officials and other Israeli leaders are saying that the danger has not completely passed and that Israel still has to be ready.
No, we have long experience in this, and we know that this is, we've listened to the American statement that this could be a long engagement. We have made the preparations for our population. We've asked them to take certain precautions, asked the people to stay in their homes for the moment. So we have not relaxed our state of alert, but we follow things, as I said, very closely and wish the American and other forces full success.
Again, as the defense officials are saying, the danger here has not completely passed, but things are looking a lot better in Israel than they did even 12 hours ago. This is Linda Scherzer reporting live from Jerusalem.
And Linda, before you go, how long will the alert continue in Israel? It appears that there is a lull right now, but will the alert in Israel continue?
Well, the Army tells us that this is on indefinitely. We can't say for sure when it will end. Israelis are being told, as I said, to stay inside their homes, to be close to their gas masks. We have seen a number of people who are out on the streets. The Army clearly doesn't want that to happen, and the advisory is still on. People should stay inside until the danger has completely passed.
Thank you, CNN's Linda Scherzer, keeping us up to date from Jerusalem. And this just in, the Soviets say that President Mikhail Gorbachev will address the nation on Soviet television within the hour. We will attempt to bring that to you live as it happens. Patrick.
Right now, for the very latest developments in eastern Saudi Arabia, let's check in with CNN's Charles Jacob, who's on the phone with us right now with the very latest. Charles?
Well, Patrick, there have been some preliminary, and I have to stress these are preliminary indications that air operations might possibly be continuing. This is based on three things. One, we've received a report from one of the journalist pools out in the field that reports about an hour and a half to 2 hours ago, they saw a flight of 9 U.S. F-15s, 3 Kuwaiti Hawk model jets, and 4 British Tornado jets take off. Now, about the same time we were outside, we saw one squadron of F-15s, their afterburners glowing, arcing up into the cloudy sky and heading north toward the Kuwaiti border. We're not sure, of course, if all this means much of anything. These could be essentially reconnaissance in force flights. However, there is a handout from the British Armed Forces Information Desk here, which talks about the initial phase of the operation, which began this morning, and they stress initial, and they end the communique by saying operations continue. So there is some thought here that perhaps, and I have to stress perhaps, based on this evidence, there might be a second wave, at least preparing to be in progress. Again, there's no confirmation of that, but there has been a fairly heavy amount of air traffic in this area. One other thing we have to stress from here, there have been some reports, we understand it, of some sort of Iraqi Scud missiles that were launched in the direction of Saudi Arabia. We have checked with both U.S. and Saudi defense sources here, and they categorically deny it. They say it's untrue. They say, as far as they know, during this entire operation, they have detected no sort of Iraqi counterstrike, either in the form of guided missiles or in the form, indeed, of airstrikes headed towards Saudi Arabia, that the skies have been completely clear. The one thing that the defense people here also want to stress is that ground forces have not even begun to be used yet, that there may be reason for optimism, but there is certainly no reason at this point to declare any sort of victory, because you have around 500,000 Iraqi forces still dug in Kuwait. And even if the reports are true that the Iraqi Air Force and most of their elite Republican guards have been destroyed, there is still the matter of all those troops in Kuwait that would have to be dislodged if they don't surrender, and they would have to be dislodged by a ground assault. But people here are watching and waiting to see what might happen next. Charles Jacob, CNN, reporting live from Saudi Arabia.
Charles, Charles, from your vantage point where you are in eastern Saudi Arabia, and we talked with our colleague John Sweeney a little while ago from Riyadh as we looked at some U.S. pool video of the F-15 Eagles taking off and preparing for the attack earlier. From your vantage point, how many jets did you see taking off from them that actually took place in the attack into Iraq and into Kuwait earlier?
Well, the F-15s apparently, from everything we've been able to ascertain, played a major role in the attack, as did other sorts of fighters and fighter-bomber attack aircraft. Apparently, the only major plane in the U.S. arsenal that did not play a role in this attack was the large lumbering B-52 bombers. We've been told that there are 20 of the B-52s, those, by aviation terms, ancient bombers, in the Middle East, in this area someplace, location undisclosed. But since they fly high and relatively slowly, the supposition among people who've been watching it is that they would not be used until the skies could pretty well be swept clean, if you will, of the Iraqi Air Force and Iraqi air defenses.
Okay, Charles Jacob reporting live from eastern Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much, and he will keep us updated on any developments from that point. Susan?
In Amman, Jordan, CNN's Tony Clark is standing by. Tony, as dawn breaks, as the morning gets underway in Jordan, what is the latest there?
Thanks, Susan. Perhaps some of the most interested in what's going on both in Iraq and in Kuwait are the Kuwaitis that are here. Jordan has been a site for many of the Kuwaitis who have fled their country in the wake of Iraq's invasion to come and wait for something to happen. Khalid Alanzi is a Kuwaiti who's here. He has been listening to the radio throughout the day. When you first heard that there were bombs falling on Baghdad, how did you feel? What did you do?
Well, I was surprised also, as everybody, because we are not looking for war. Nobody wants war. But Mr. President Saddam Hussein is looking for these things because he don't obey all the international opinion. He don't follow the laws of the people. He don't want peace. He's not looking for peace. That's why they started the war against him.
One of the things you were telling me earlier, your reaction when you first heard that the bombs were falling, what did you do?
Well, I was crying and happy at the same time. I can't express my feeling to you because I was crying for my family in Kuwait, for the Iraqi people also in Iraq, and I was happy because I want to see my country free.
When do you hope to be able to go back to Kuwait?
Well, today, as soon as possible. I backed my thing now.
So that you think this may be over quickly, you can go back to Kuwait and see your family?
Yeah.
And what do you expect to see when you get back to Kuwait?
Well, just I want to see Kuwait. Just Kuwait. I want to see the sand of Kuwait. That's more than enough.
You left November 1st. You have been in Jordan, though, only 10 days. How was Kuwait when you left?
Well, it was a Gulf city. Nothing in Kuwait. They stoned everything. There's nothing in Kuwait.
And what do you want to happen to Saddam Hussein? Is there anger? Is there fear? Is there sadness?
Saddam Hussein, somebody will punish him, his country, all his people. We have no right to punish him. Let his people punish him.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we have heard from Kuwaitis here in Jordan throughout the morning is they say we are wrong when we say that the war began today. They say for them, the war, the Persian Gulf War, began on August 2nd when Iraq came into Kuwait. I'm Tony Clark, CNN, reporting live from Amman.
Thank you, Tony. And to recap, British Prime Minister John Major is expected to hold a news conference within the hour. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is also expected to address the Soviet people on Soviet television also within the hour. We hope to bring both of those events to you live. Patrick.
And for the very latest, once again, let's go back to CNN correspondent John Holloman, who is on the phone with us right now from Baghdad. John, what's the latest?
Well, Patrick, Iraqi television tells us they are still attempting to feed a message from President Saddam Hussein to CNN and the world. The feed could come up at any time, but there's no pathway that we have determined as yet to get the pictures and sounds out of Baghdad to Jordan, which is where our satellite uplink is for the CNN flyaway unit. So that's why we're having trouble getting those pictures and sounds to you. Situation in downtown Baghdad, no water. It needs electricity to be pumped. Electricity is still off. Telephones, wait. I was about about to tell you telephones were still out, but as you can hear, telephone service has this instant been restored, at least to the point that phones will ring here. This may help us communicate with the TV station and get these pictures to you a little bit sooner. At any rate, the Iraqi government has issued a statement about the attack last night, saying President Bush will regret the attack. The Americans and their allies will be taught a lesson. Saddam Hussein, as we told you, is planning to address the Iraqi people. Jordan, Iraq's closest ally in this region, perhaps at the moment, has closed its airspace to all incoming and outgoing flights, which means there's no way for any flight from Iraq to get to the outside world. And let's see, Saddam Hussein said in a Baghdad radio message that was broadcast about an hour ago, "The mother of all battles has started. Victory is very near." Those are two quotes from Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. On the streets of Baghdad, still very quiet. There's some traffic out there, still very foggy outside. John Holloman, CNN Live in Baghdad.
John, let me ask you a question. You were asked earlier about the damage. Obviously, you and your colleague Bernie Shaw and Peter Arnett, as well as some other CNN people, were in the hotel during the onslaught of all of the bombing around Baghdad. Again, though, as far as your own damage estimate, as you go out visually and look around, you don't see any major damage, at least from where you are near the hotel?
No, Patrick, we don't see any damage in the hotel, certainly not in the area that we can see from the hotel, and that takes you out about a mile or two, because we're up pretty high. Chris Kuzmanich, who's been to Iraqi television, says the TV station is just absolutely intact, and so he's been out further than we have, and she reports that there's no damage visible in downtown Baghdad, but we saw a lot of activity outside of town. One of the first places we're going to go today, if we get an opportunity to get in a vehicle and travel, and we're sure it's safe to do that, is out to the airport, the international airport. It looks to us like much of the fighting that was going on, much of the bombing that was being done was in the vicinity of Saddam International Airport. And we'll want to go there and take some pictures first to see if our estimate is in fact correct. And then if the Iraqi officials will allow it, we'll go around all over the countryside here and see just exactly what damage was done by the coalition attack overnight.
John, with your discussions with the Iraqi officials who... John, just stand by on the phone. We're going to go to Susan right now with late development.
Apparently, we are going to pull video that was shot yesterday as U.S. and multinational forces. We think it was shot yesterday as U.S. and multinational forces were getting ready for the overnight airstrike against Baghdad, an airstrike that our correspondent John Holloman and the CNN crew in Baghdad weathered and gave us live, harrowing accounts of the attack as it was underway. And just to give you a little bit of background, as we're watching this unedited U.S. poll tape, when the orders actually came for the fighter pilots to get under the way, the men assembled in the squad room very quickly, of course. In recent nights and for about the past week, they have made a point of sleeping very close to the squad room so that they could get there very quickly. They've been sleeping in nearby bunkers. They then received a highly technical briefing involving which bombers they would be escorting, which altitudes they would be flying, all sort of housekeeping things like this. We have just confirmed that this was shot yesterday. Again, as things actually heat up, the crews got the orders that which altitudes, which bombers they would be escorting, which refueling tankers they would use, and of course which targets the mission, their particular mission would be asked to destroy.